The first time anyone in the village ever truly noticed Nia, she was standing alone under the baobab tree while the sun melted into the hills. She couldn't have been more than 5, but even then her stillness carried weight. The other children were loud, chasing chickens and throwing stones into the river, but Nia only watched, not out of fear nor sadness, but with a quietness that felt like it had come from the bones of her ancestors. Her eyes did not dart around like the others. They stayed locked on the horizon, calm, wide, ancient. Her mother had died a few months before that moment. Some said it was childbirth fever, others whispered that a spirit had come for her. The village never agreed on the cause, but they all agreed on one thing. Nia's mother had left something behind, something more than a daughter. A dowry, yes. But not just any dowry. A chest lined with red silk, filled with handcrafted jewelry, old woven fabrics laced with cowrie shells, scented oils from lands far beyond the village, and a mirror wrapped in leather that no one was allowed to touch. It wasn't stored in her father's hut. It was hidden, buried beneath a stone carved with her mother's name. No one knew exactly where, except the old midwife who helped deliver Nia and was said to be the only one trusted with the secret. The villagers said the dowry had spirit in it, not in a cursed way, no. In a protective way. It was sacred. Her mother, Acua, had once saved the village from a fire that swept in from the north. They said she spoke to the flames and made them turn back. They said her dowry was laced with protection, so that her daughter would never walk the world alone. And Nia didn't, not truly. There was always something beside her, even if unseen. The elders could feel it. Dogs barked at her shadow but not at her. The leaves rustled when she sat, even on a still day. She never looked anyone in the eye too long. Not because she was timid, but because people often looked away first. Her father, Demoa, was a tall man with wide shoulders and calloused palms. He was not cruel, just tired. He loved his daughter in his way, fed her, clothed her, built her a separate space in the hut so she could keep to herself. But after Acua died, something in him dulled. The smile left his eyes. He no longer hummed when he worked. He no longer joined the men at the fire circle. He no longer looked toward the forest where he used to meet Acua in secret when they were young and unmarried. So when a widow named Jada arrived from the eastern hills, carrying nothing but a gourd of rainwater and a mouth full of sharp words, Demoa saw in her not a wife but an ending to his loneliness. He married her by the river at dusk. Nia did not cry. She merely watched. As always, Jada was not cruel in the beginning, not openly. She greeted Nia with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that lingered too long. She gave her honey in her porridge and told her to sit close. But there was something hollow in her voice, something sharp beneath the sweet. Jada had once had a daughter too, they said, but the girl had died from snakebite. Or fever. Or shame. The stories shifted depending on who you asked. What didn't shift was the way Jada looked at Nia's hair, long, black, untouched. Or the way she stared at her when Nia played the flute her mother carved. Or how her hands clenched when villagers greeted Nia first and her second. There were things Jada couldn't understand. Why did the elders treat this quiet girl like she carried wisdom beyond her years? Why did even the chickens seem to move away from her path? Why did her presence make the rain fall softer and the wind pause for breath? It gnawed at her. The jealousy. It started small like a worm in fruit, quiet, hidden. But it grew. In the village, people noticed Jada's questions. She asked too often about the dowry. Why does a child need riches hidden in the ground? She would ask, pouring millet into a pot. What good does it do sitting under dirt while we eat leaves? The women at the well did not answer her. The elders ignored her. But silence is not the same as approval, and silence is not a cure for envy. Nia, for her part, said nothing. She did not ask her father to defend her. She did not whimper when Jada accidentally spilled hot broth on her legs or made her kneel on palm nuts until her knees bled. She did not cry when Jada gave her only half a yam while keeping the larger piece for herself. She simply accepted, endured, and grew. And grow she did. By 15, Nia had the elegance of her mother and the silence of the moon. Boys tried to impress her, dancing with antelope masks, drumming under her window at night, bringing carved gifts to her father, but she politely declined them all. Her eyes looked further than the village paths. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. The birds stopped singing when she sang. The wind turned when she hummed. There was power in her, power she did not ask for but could not deny. Jada hated it. The dowry, though unseen, became the root of all her bitterness. It wasn't about the objects, not truly. It was about legacy. About how Acua had managed to make the village remember her even in death, while Jada, alive and breathing, barely received a nod. She began to poison the father's ear. That girl is too quiet. That kind of silence is dangerous. You think she honors you, but she dishonors your house. She thinks herself too good for us. For you. Demoa listened at first in silence. Then slowly he began to believe. He began to see shadows in Nia's presence. He began to fear what he once cherished. He no longer called her my moonlight. He no longer braided her hair on full moon nights or asked her to sing for him. He grew colder, harder. And Jada smiled in secret, for this was what she wanted, not love but erasure. Nia never begged for her father's affection. She simply watched it slip from her like water through fingers. The hurt lived in her chest like a silent drumbeat. She would walk to the old tree by the river at night and hum songs her mother taught her. She would press her forehead against the bark and whisper into it. Some said the tree answered. Some said the river changed direction when she cried. But no one dared question it aloud. The dowry remained untouched for now. But whispers began to move through the village again. Whispers about how it wasn't right that a girl should own what even women twice her age hadn't touched. Whispers that maybe it should be returned to the earth. Or to the fire. Jada listened to these whispers. She fed them. She watered them like seedlings until they took root in the community. And she waited. One night, as the moon bled orange in the sky and the air smelled of copper and storm, Jada stood by the fire outside the hut and smiled. Her hands were steady, her eyes cold. Her plan was simple. She would take what wasn't hers. She would burn what she couldn't own. She would destroy what Acua had left behind, and with it destroy the memory of a woman whose shadow still danced through the village. But what Jada didn't know was this. Some things don't burn the way you want them to. Some ashes don't scatter. Some embers carry breath. And Nia, with her quiet eyes and her haunted silence, was about to awaken something that could never be killed. There are many kinds of hatred in the world. Some burn bright and fast, flaring like a spark in dry grass. Others crawl slowly through the soul, like oil soaking into cloth, silent, thick, impossible to clean. Mama Jada's hatred for Nia was of the second kind. It did not come all at once. It fermented. At first, it was a bitter taste on the back of her tongue when the villagers greeted Nia with reverence and offered her silence only stiff nods. Then it became the tightness in her throat when Demoa mentioned Nia's mother's name with a softness that had long left his voice for Jada. And slowly it became something else entirely, a sickness, an obsession, a mission. What angered her most was that Nia didn't even try. The girl did not seek attention, did not speak loudly, did not flash pride or command with force. She simply existed, silently, confidently, with a grace Jada could never replicate. And the people loved her for it. When Nia walked into the market, even the oldest women paused their bargaining to watch her pass. When she touched a child's head, the child would sleep without nightmares. When she sang, even quietly while pounding yam or sweeping the compound, the birds would fall silent and the air would hum along. Jada had tried everything. She cooked for the elders. She told stories to the children. She even sang at one festival. Her voice cracked, but she sang, and yet no one looked at her the way they looked at Nia. No one remembered her the next morning. It was as though her presence barely left a print in the dust. So she began to attack in the shadows. Whispered words to women at the river, casual doubts at the market, sly comments at the fire circle. She's too quiet for a girl her age. You don't think she's hiding something? She'd murmur while cleaning her gourd. They say she speaks to trees. That can't be natural. Or, her eyes don't blink like ours. Maybe she sees what we're not supposed to. She never accused directly. That would have drawn suspicion. Instead, she spread doubt like seeds in dry earth, trusting the wind of village gossip to do the rest. And it worked. Some began to notice things they hadn't before. The way Nia never got sick even when others did. The way fires always caught quickly when she was near. The way her hair never tangled even after sleep. These were once signs of blessing, but Jada twisted them into something else. Blessings? She'd scoff. Or curses wrapped in silk? The villagers didn't confront Nia, not yet, but their eyes shifted. Their greetings became shorter. Children began to fear her shadow. Jada used the shift to deepen her poison in Demoa's ears. Every night she pressed her head against his chest, her fingers trailing his chest, her words like venom wrapped in silk. Your daughter? She's not like us anymore. She doesn't speak, doesn't ask, doesn't laugh. That's not grief. That's something else. Something darker. Demoa, tired from farming and old with the weight of disappointment, began to see it too. He no longer kissed Nia's forehead when he passed her. He no longer brought her trinkets from the market. He stopped asking about her dreams. The space between them became a gulf filled with silence and suspicion. Nia noticed, of course, but she said nothing. What words could mend a crack made by whispers? Then came the rumors of suitors. Nia was nearing her 17th season, and talk of marriage buzzed around her like bees in heat. The elders whispered that the dowry her mother had left, though never shown, was enough to attract sons of chiefs, even men from distant lands. But Jada made sure these rumors soured quickly. She may be beautiful, but beauty fades, she'd say at the well. And what if her womb is dry? Or worse, what if her womb is filled with something not of this world? When asked what she meant, she'd laugh and wave her hand as if joking. But the laughter never reached her eyes. 3 suitors came. The first, a hunter's son from across the river, brought cola nuts and a red-feathered cap. He was strong, polite, and struck speechless by Nia's presence. He barely managed to speak when he stood before her, only bowed and offered a carved comb. That night, his hunting dogs howled into the night and refused to eat. By morning he was gone. The second was a wealthy merchant's nephew, all gold bracelets and loud charm. He asked many questions about the dowry. Jada noticed. She fed him palm wine until he was drunk enough to say too much. By dawn he too had vanished, claiming he dreamt of burning hands pressing into his chest. The third suitor was different. He came quietly without gifts or noise. A tall man with eyes the color of river stone. Kojo was his name. A blacksmith's son. He spoke to Nia with respect, not flattery. And for the first time she looked directly into someone's eyes and did not look away. Something shifted in her that day. A soft thing. A dangerous thing. Oh, Jada saw it. And she hated it. Kojo stayed. Visited often. Helped Demoa repair tools. Sang songs with the village boys. And though the villagers still whispered about Nia, they could not deny Kojo's choice. So preparations began. The elders began to prepare the wedding rites. The women gathered to discuss cloth and food. And talk of the dowry returned, louder this time, bolder. Jada watched it all with a smile that did not reach her teeth. She knew that dowry was the final thread tying Akua's memory to Nia's future. If Nia entered her new life with it intact, Jada's years of manipulation would unravel. The girl would rise, the village would remember, and Jada would fade again into nothing. So she began to plan. She asked Demoa about the dowry at night in soft whispers. He deflected, then grew irritated. But Jada persisted. If she's to marry, shouldn't we see it? Shouldn't we know what treasure she's bringing into another man's home? What if it's all lies? What if there's nothing there? Demoa grunted, unsure. He too had never seen the chest. So Jada changed tactics. She's cursed, Demoa. Don't you see it now? Her silence, her power, her unaging face. That's not blessing. That's a shadow. She cried that night, tears real or forced, it didn't matter. She begged him to think of their home, their name, their safety. I just want her to be normal, she whispered. That word, normal. It echoed in Demoa's head. He stared at his daughter the next morning, bent over the yam heap, humming something he couldn't understand, and for the first time in years he felt afraid of her. The wedding drew nearer. Kojo brought gifts to the hut. The villagers built a small fire circle near the couple's future home. But Jada did not smile. She sharpened a knife behind the hut while the others laughed. She counted matches in the dark while Nia braided her hair. She dreamed of flames every night, and in her dreams the chest burned until the sky turned black. She knew now what must be done. The dowry could not be shared. It could not be gifted, guarded, or passed down. It had to burn. All of it. With fire hot enough to scorch memory itself. Because if Nia's dowry lived, so did Akua. And Jada would not be forgotten again. The night before the wedding arrived with an eerie stillness. The kind of silence that presses on the chest like a waiting storm. Even the insects, usually noisy in the underbrush, had quieted. The moon was a thin silver blade, slicing through clouds too thick to be natural. The wind that usually swept in from the east had stopped altogether. The village should have been buzzing with celebration, laughter, final touches, and midnight songs. But it wasn't. A tension hung in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. Nia sat in the doorway of the hut she would soon leave, braiding her hair in long, thoughtful strands. Her fingers moved automatically, but her mind wandered. Kojo's eyes had lingered longer today. The women had touched her cheeks with scented oils and whispered prayers into her ears. The children had danced around her with flowers in their hair. And yet her chest felt tight. Not from fear, she didn't fear marriage, but from something deeper. A knowing. Like something she couldn't name was already slipping away. Inside, her father had drunk too much palm wine. He had not said much. only looked at her once or twice with a strange expression on his face, as if trying to remember something forgotten, or perhaps trying to forget something he had allowed to grow too far. And then there was Jada. She had been too quiet, too still. Her eyes had not once met Nia's that day, and her smile had felt like a trap carved into wood. She had not helped prepare the feast, nor joined the other women in blessings. She had sat in the shade most of the day, her hands rubbing something in her lap, something wrapped in cloth. What Nia didn't know was that Jada had already taken the key. It had taken years to find where the dowry was buried. The midwife had been careful, but the drunken murmurs of old men and the innocent chatter of children had left enough clues. A stone behind the old tree. A carving no one dared disturb. And now, under the cover of the dim moon, Jada moved with purpose. She had taken a shovel 2 nights before, hidden it behind a tree. She had stolen dried palm leaves from the granary, old kerosene from the healer's store, and her own mother's flint stones. And now, barefoot and breathless, she dug into the red earth. It took longer than expected. The roots of the baobab fought her. They clung to the chest like fingers of the dead. But rage is a powerful thing, and Jada had waited too long to fail. When the shovel finally struck the wood, something pulsed through the soil. A vibration like a heartbeat. She paused, but only for a moment. The chest was heavier than she thought. Carved from dark Irako wood, its handles were wrapped in cloth that had not rotted. The symbols carved into the top were worn, but still visible. A serpent, a flame, a woman's face. Jada didn't care what they meant. She pulled the chest out and dragged it to the clearing where the firewood was already waiting. She opened the lid with trembling hands. Inside, even the air smelled old. The fabrics were still brilliant, deep reds, royal blues, golden yellows. They shimmered under the moonlight like they remembered sunlight. Beads carved from bone and polished stone rattled softly in their bags. The sacred oils gave off a scent so thick and sweet it nearly made her gag. There was a mirror, small and round, wrapped in leather and tied with a braided cord. Jada touched it and felt something cold behind her eyes. She dropped it back. And then the dress. Akua's wedding cloth. It was folded at the bottom of the chest, untouched, like it was waiting for one final dance. Jada stared at it for a long time. There was power in that cloth. You could feel it. As though it had memory, breath, defiance. She threw it into the fire first. The flames didn't catch at once. The cloth resisted, curled, darkened, but would not burn. Jada cursed and added more oil. She threw in the beads, the silks, the oils, the leather-wrapped mirror. The fire began to roar. The chest itself, once emptied, was split with the shovel and fed into the flames. The sky did not like it. Thunder cracked above, sudden and sharp. No clouds had been there a moment before. The wind, which had vanished, returned with a whisper that slid along Jada's spine like a knife. But she ignored it. Her face was wild with joy and fury. She danced around the fire, spitting into it, shouting, "Let it burn. Let it all burn. Let her walk into marriage with nothing but ash and shame." In the distance something stirred. An owl screamed. Dogs began to bark in their sleep. The goats rammed at their pens. The trees shifted, though no one was near. And then Nia woke. Smoke filled her nose first. Then the screams, not of people but of the fire itself. It was not a crackle. It was a howl. Like something inside was being murdered. She ran outside barefoot, her braids swinging behind her like ropes. She followed the scent, the sound, the energy. And there, in the clearing, she saw it. The dowry. Or what was left of it. The fire was high and angry. It wasn't a wedding fire. It was a pyre. A funeral for something sacred. Her heart dropped. She saw her mother's fabrics twisting in the flames like dancers on fire. She saw the beads burst one by one with tiny pops like bones breaking. She saw the mirror scream, not with sound but with light as it shattered. And she saw Jada. The woman stood near the fire, arms raised, her face painted with soot and triumph. For a moment, Nia thought she was watching a mad spirit, not a human. But then Jada turned and their eyes met. There was silence. So loud it felt deafening. Jada spoke first, voice hoarse not from regret but joy. "It's done. You have nothing now. Nothing but ashes." Nia did not cry. She did not scream. She stepped forward, past her father who had stumbled out in time to see the end. Past the villagers who had begun to gather with confusion and horror. She walked until she stood right before the flames. And then the wind moved. It had not blown all night but now it rose. Not from the sky, from the ground. From the fire itself. And with it came the ashes. They didn't float upward like normal ashes. They rose in spirals, in columns, in slow deliberate shapes. The smoke thickened not into a haze but into forms. Thin arms, long necks, hollow eyes, faces, dozens of them feminine, ancient, watching. The villagers gasped and fell to their knees. Jada stumbled back, eyes wide. "What is this?" she hissed. Nia did not answer. She was looking into the fire, but her eyes saw something else. The past. Her mother. The promise whispered into her hair as a baby. The spell spoken into the cloths. The blessings woven into the dowry. It hadn't been wealth. It had been protection. Memory. Spirit. And now it was awake. The ashes danced around her, wrapping her gently. Not burning. Not hurting. They lifted her braids. Touched her cheeks. Spoke to her without sound. She heard her mother's voice among them, soft but resolute. "Daughter of flame. You have lost nothing. You are now what was protected." Jada tried to run. The ashes followed. They didn't touch her, not yet, but they hovered, just above her skin, just behind her steps, like a second shadow. Demoa fell to the ground, shaking. "What have we done?" he whispered. Nia turned to him. Her eyes no longer quiet. They burned like the fire, but without heat. Without rage. Just knowledge. "I am not cursed," she said softly. "I am kept." And with that the ashes settled. Not to the ground, into her. Around her. Inside her. Her skin glowed faintly, only visible to those who dared to look directly. The fire went out in a breath, leaving behind not soot but silence. When the villagers returned to their homes, no one spoke of it aloud. But none would forget. And Jada? She did not sleep that night. Because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ashes crawling, growing, whispering. And somewhere deep inside she knew. She had not destroyed the dowry. She had released it. Nia sat quietly by the remains of the dowry, the ash now a permanent stain upon the earth behind their home. It had been 3 days and still the wind did not carry it away. The villagers whispered about it. Children dared each other to run past it at night. Some said the ground was cursed. Others said the dowry was too sacred to burn, and the land refused to accept what had been done. Nia didn't speak much after the fire. Her eyes, once calm, now held something unsettled, like a surface of still water hiding something vast and dark beneath. She didn't weep publicly. She just sat by the ashes when no one was looking, as if waiting for her mother to rise from them. But even Nia did not expect what came next. It began the night of the full moon. The air felt different, thicker like honey that had been left out too long. The crickets stopped singing. Even the leaves on the trees seemed to pause in their usual rustling dance. Nia lay in her mat, unable to sleep. Her mind replayed the fire again and again, the way the flames had swallowed her mother's beads, the way the oil had hissed, the way her father's eyes had remained shut when she'd screamed his name. And then she heard it. A whisper. Not from outside. Not from another room. It came from within the very walls of her home. Or perhaps, deeper, from inside her bones. Nia. Her name carried on a voice that was at once familiar and foreign. It sounded like her mother's voice, but rougher, older, as if time itself had carved lines into it. She sat up slowly. Her eyes darted around the dark hut. Nothing moved. Nothing glowed. But the whisper came again. Nia, child of fire. She felt her chest tighten. She stepped outside into the night. The moon was high, casting long shadows like reaching fingers. The ash pile was still there, untouched. But now, it glowed. Faintly. Like embers refusing to die. She moved closer, barefoot, careful. As she neared, the glow intensified, not bright but pulsing as though something beneath the ash still breathed. She knelt. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, touching the gray surface. It was cold. But as her skin made contact, a jolt ran up her arm. Not pain but memory. Images flashed in her mind. Her mother laughing in the sunlight, the sound of beads clinking together, the scent of the sacred oil her mother always wore. And then something else. A darker vision. Her mother's hands, not soft but scorched, reaching out of the fire. Holding something. A shadow. Nia gasped and pulled her hand back. Her breath came fast. The ashes moved. Not from wind. They stirred. Shifted. As if something beneath them had turned in its sleep. And then the whisper again. She thought fire could destroy what was never hers. Nia stumbled back, heart pounding. Her eyes refused to blink. The ash had settled again, but now she was sure. This was not just the remains of fabric and oil. This was something else. Something sacred. Something watching. Over the next days she kept hearing the voice. It only came at night. Always in whispers. Sometimes soft, sometimes urgent. It told her things. of her mother's line. Of women who carried more than just blood, they carried fire, power, legacy. It spoke of protection, of vengeance, of rebirth. And always it called her child of ash and flame. Nia began to feel different, stronger. She no longer flinched when Mama Jada walked past her. She no longer looked down when villagers muttered cruel things they'd heard from her stepmother. She began to dream. In her dreams she stood in the ashes, and they rose around her like smoke made of memory. The dowry reassembled itself, cloth folding out from nothing, beads stringing themselves midair, oils dripping back into sealed vials. But it wasn't the same dowry. It was darker, wilder. The colors were deeper, almost bruised with sorrow. The beads hummed like insects. The oil shimmered with something like stars. And always in the center of the dream stood her mother, face veiled in smoke, arms outstretched. But Nia could never reach her. Something always held her back. A force she didn't yet understand. One night, Nia stood by the ashes and asked the voice out loud, "Why me?" The answer came as always in a whisper. "Because you remember." She didn't understand. But she accepted it. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the earth and shadows grew long, a villager named Kibbo approached her. He was an old man, once a friend of her mother. He looked uncomfortable, like someone standing on the edge of a storm. "I saw the ashes move," he said without preamble. "I saw them dance in the moonlight like they had life." Nia looked at him. "You're not afraid?" "I am," he admitted. "But not of you. Of what she left behind." "What did she leave behind?" Kibbo looked toward the ashes. "Something no fire can kill. Something older than our village. Older than our names." He walked away before she could ask more. That night the voice was clearer, louder. It told her it was time. Time to remember. Time to rise. Nia stood over the ashes. She spoke the name her mother had whispered to her as a child. An old name, passed down from women who walked with spirits. The ash rose. It didn't swirl. It lifted, shaped itself, not into a woman, not into a creature, but into a presence. And it entered her. Not like possession. Not like fear. Like breath. Like coming home. Nia collapsed. When she woke, the sun was rising. The ash was gone. Not blown away, absorbed into her. And her eyes, once quiet and soft, now held embers. The villagers noticed. Whispers spread. Mama Jada noticed too. And for the first time she looked at Nia not with anger, but with fear. Because Nia wasn't just the girl with the quiet eyes anymore. She was the girl the ashes followed. And something had been born. Something that remembered every spark, every ember, every betrayal. Something that had no name, because it had never died. And now, it walked with Nia. Always waiting. The wedding day dawned not with songs but with silence. The sun rose shyly behind a veil of gray clouds, casting a pale light over the village as if even it mourned. Where there should have been dancing and drumming, there was only the sound of hesitant footsteps. The elders muttered among themselves, their eyes darting toward the scorched compound where Nia's dowry had been reduced to blackened earth and ash. No one dared speak of it directly, but everyone felt it. A shadow had fallen over the ceremony. Kojo, the man she was to marry, stood with his jaw clenched and eyes heavy. He had loved Nia since they were children, not the loud kind of love that sang from rooftops, but the patient kind that grew in silence, steady as the baobab tree. He had waited for her, worked for her, dreamed of this day. But now everything had changed. He took her hand in the village square, beneath the elder's staff and the half-hearted chants, and vowed to be her husband. But even as he smiled for her sake, his grip trembled, not from fear of commitment, but from something unseen. The ashes had followed her, clinging to her gown, caught in her braids, settling behind her like a silent witness. When they arrived at his family home, she was welcomed with duty rather than joy. His mother did not embrace her, nor did the children sing her name. There were no gifts waiting, no feasts laid out. A quiet tension lay thick in the air, like a storm just beyond the mountains. Nia tried to smile, to show gratitude, to be the bride everyone expected. But each time she laughed, it sounded hollow, as though something deep within her no longer remembered how to be light. Strange things began happening almost immediately. That first night, when she poured water into the pot for evening bathing, the water turned cloudy and cold, no matter how many times she heated it. The mirror in their sleeping hut cracked without reason when she approached it. Chickens refused to enter the courtyard when she was present, and the family dog whimpered and ran under the bed whenever she passed. Kojo noticed, of course, but he said nothing. He merely sat at the edge of the bed, holding his head in his hands, praying beneath his breath. At night, Nia dreamed in colors that didn't exist. The skies in her visions bled purple and silver, and her mother's voice echoed in riddles she couldn't understand. "What is born in fire cannot be drowned," it said one night. "The ashes are not gone, they are watching." Each morning she woke with her heart pounding and the feeling of something heavy sitting on her chest. When she told Kojo, he reached for her but pulled back before his fingers could touch her skin. He had started to fear her, not openly but in small ways. A delay before a kiss, a second glance when she entered the room, a habit of sleeping just a little farther from her each night. The villagers whispered too. They said the marriage would bring ruin, that a woman without a dowry was cursed, that the fire had taken not just her belongings but her purity, her soul. Children pointed at her and hid behind their mothers. Old women spat on the ground as she passed. The only ones who didn't speak were the young girls. They watched her with a mixture of awe and dread, as if they sensed something had awakened in Nia that even she didn't understand. Still she tried. She swept the compound before dawn, fetched water, cooked, and served with hands that trembled but didn't falter. But the ashes, they never left. No matter how many times she cleaned, no matter how heavy the rains fell, they remained, collecting in corners, streaking across the floor like fingerprints of a ghost. And sometimes when she sat alone, they would swirl into shapes: a woman's face, a mother's hands, a necklace of flame. Kojo's family began to distance themselves. His younger brother refused to eat food she prepared. His aunt claimed her skin had broken out in boils after using a pot Nia had washed. And one evening Kojo returned from the market and found a charm, made of bones and dried leaves, hanging from the threshold of their door. He removed it in silence but his face was pale. "They're afraid of you," he said simply, not meeting her eyes. "They think the fire marked you." She wanted to scream, to cry, to explain that she had done nothing, that it was Mama Jada who had set the fire, who had cursed her, if curses even existed. But instead she nodded. What could she say that wouldn't make it worse? She lay awake that night beside Kojo, staring at the cracked ceiling, the ashes whispering again beneath the floorboards. Her life, the girl she had been, was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone the village feared. Someone even she was beginning not to recognize. And deep in her heart, a question began to burn, soft, dangerous, and slow. What if the ashes weren't a curse? What if they were a gift? The whispers came first. At dusk, when the sun bowed behind the baobab trees and the earth exhaled the heat of the day, the ashes would stir. Not just as dust caught in a breeze but as if they remembered how to move. As if they had memory. Nia sat on the clay floor of her new home, her legs tucked beneath her, her hands trembling over the mat she wove. She had not spoken of the ashes since her wedding. No one did. Not even Kojo. They were something that existed between silences, between the blinking of eyes and the turning of backs. But they were always there. That night they rose. Not high, not grand. At first, just a swirl at the threshold, a small puff of soot curling up from the shadow. Then another, coiling up near the hearth. The shape took on the subtle curve of a woman's back, then dissolved. Another formed, this time a face, the eyes wide and empty, like they were trying to remember how to see. Nia stared. The air grew cold, not like rain, not like harmattan, but like something had reached through time and pulled the breath from the room. The ashes danced in silence, no wind driving them, no motion to explain their rhythm. They knew her. She felt it. Their turning followed her movement. When she gasped, they twisted. When she stood, they parted. She whispered her mother's name. And the ashes answered. A voice, not quite her mother's but stitched with it, rose in the room. It was not coming from the walls, nor the sky, but from within her own ribs, from somewhere deep and burning. It said nothing intelligible. Just hums, echoes, half-breathed lullabies that Nia barely remembered. Then came the visions. That night, in her sleep, her dreams twisted. She walked through fire, but it did not burn. Her dowry rose from the flames, the beads glowing with pulse, the silks floating like spirits, the sacred oils dripping like golden tears. But their faces, yes, now they had faces, wept. Her mother's dress curled in flame, its fabric whispering prayers she never learned. From the ashes, a hand reached out, caressing Nia's cheek with warmth, then vanishing into smoke. When she woke, her hands smelled of incense and ash. The floor was streaked with soot footprints, yet neither she nor Kojo had moved. By day the hauntings grew bolder. A neighbor who muttered harshly about her the day before found his roof caved in that morning. A market woman who laughed when Nia walked by tripped over her own mat, breaking a tooth. These were things villagers whispered about in corners, not willing to blame her, but unwilling not to notice the pattern. Kojo grew wary, but he never accused. He simply looked at her longer, as if searching her face for something he once knew and now feared to find. The ashes were no longer just dust. One evening, as she fetched water from the back of the compound, a figure stepped into her path, Mama Jada. The stepmother stood like a stone tree, arms folded, eyes sharp. She said nothing at first. Just stared at Nia with that same glinting resentment, but it was more cautious now. Less arrogant. Something had shifted. You think you've won? Mama Jada hissed, her voice low. You think this thing will save you? Nia didn't answer. You're cursed, she spat, stepping closer. I see it. It clings to you. That's when it happened. The ashes, even without fire, rose from the very earth. They curled around Nia's feet and climbed upward like ivy. Mama Jada stepped back, fear flashing in her expression. A figure formed, behind Nia, above her, tall, faceless but outlined by shimmering soot. It pulsed once like a heartbeat, then vanished. Mama Jada screamed. She stumbled away, muttering prayers, tripping over her own feet. Nia stood alone but no longer afraid. She didn't ask for this. But she now understood. The ashes had become something more. They were not merely her mother's dowry, or the remnants of sacred gifts. They were now ancestral memories twisted by grief, shaped by betrayal, awakened by injustice. They had been called forth by fire and bound to her pain. But they were hers. They protected, yes. But they destroyed too. A week later, when a visiting elder from another village refused to bless her because he sensed unrest, he went blind the same night. An owl, the symbol of watchers, perched outside her window for 3 nights, then vanished in smoke. And each time Nia closed her eyes, she heard the hum again. A song she never learned but somehow remembered. She was no longer simply the girl with quiet eyes. She had become the bearer of a dowry burned into spirit, a living ember carrying something old and wild. A curse, a guardian, a reckoning. And it had chosen her. Mama Jada was once the woman whose footsteps echoed with confidence through the village pathways, whose scarf was always tied just so, whose laugh, even if sharp, rang clearly. But ever since the dowry fire, that laugh had curdled into something bitter and brittle. No one knew exactly when the shift began, but it started small, little things almost dismissible. At first it was her eyes. They stayed wide longer than they should, like she was waiting for something to appear that never came. She would stare into the fire as if searching for answers in the flames, or maybe trying to keep something out. Then came the mutterings. She began to whisper to herself, lips dry and fast, like a prayer spoken backward. Children stopped playing near her hut. One child claimed she saw Mama Jada talking to a pile of gray dust outside her window. Another said the wind that blew past her hut always smelt like burnt fabric. She couldn't sleep. Her nights were long and cruel. Villagers walking by late at night would hear thumps and wails from inside her home. Some claimed they saw ash creeping through the cracks in her windows, not blown by the wind, but slithering like it had legs and a destination. Once, a neighbor swore she saw Mama Jada standing in her doorway just before dawn, hands trembling, staring at the sky. She was mouthing something soundlessly, as if speaking to something that hovered in the dark. The whispers began soon after. The village, once quick to applaud Mama Jada's sharp tongue and iron discipline, now watched her with careful distance. Kojo's aunt murmured that the fire had released more than smoke. An old healer even refused to pass by her hut, saying, "That place remembers what it did. And it's remembering louder every night." Inside her own home, Mama Jada was at war with shadows. She tried to scrub the walls, convinced that soot was seeping through from the inside. She boiled herbs to rid herself of the voices. But the more she scrubbed, the more soot appeared. The more she boiled, the louder the whispers grew. At first they were just hisses, soft like someone breathing near her ear. But then they began to speak in her mother tongue, then in her grandmother's tongue, and then in no language she recognized. Some voices were shrill like a crying infant, others deep and grinding like trees groaning in the wind. They called her name. Over and over. Not with hate, but with something worse, recognition. She was the one who had disturbed the balance. She had burned what was meant to endure. Her husband, Nia's father, tried to intervene but she pushed him away. She accused him of being part of the curse, of choosing Nia over her. She screamed about glowing ashes that walked, hands in the fire that reached for her throat, her mother's voice rising from Nia's shadow. She stopped eating. Her skin shriveled. Her scarf was no longer tied. She laughed at random and wept at nothing. Children who once ran errands for her refused to go near her door. Even goats avoided her path. When she passed through the market, People parted not with respect, but fear. One afternoon during a village meeting, Mama Jada stood up in the middle of the elders' circle and began to speak in riddles. Her voice was low and slow. She wore silence like silk, she said. But silence burns louder than screams. The dowry was never mine. But the ashes, they remember my hands. The elders stared. One brave woman asked, Mama Jada, who are you speaking about? Mama Jada smiled then, a slow, cracked smile that didn't reach her eyes. She's coming, she said. The bride of ashes. And she brings the songs of the dead. Whispers spread like locusts through the village. By evening, no one could say her name without shivering. They started speaking of Nia in lower tones, unsure if she was a victim or a vessel. Some thought she brought the curse upon the land. Others said it was justice. The dowry's fire had awakened the ancestors, and they were speaking through their chosen. As for Mama Jada, she stopped appearing in public. Her hut grew darker by the day. Windows were shut, yet ash still crept beneath her door. She covered mirrors, doused fires, and even tried to bury her cooking pots. Nothing worked. The whispers grew teeth. And the guilt she once buried in the smoke came back, not as memory but as living breath. One night, the old healer returned, placing a bowl of salt and herbs at her door. It is not forgiveness you need, she whispered. It is surrender. But Mama Jada no longer listened to mortals. Her ears were now tuned to the voices in the ashes. And they were getting louder. Nia traveled deep into the thicket hills where the old earth met the sky, following whispers she barely heard and visions that flickered like smoke behind her eyes. The villagers had all but turned their backs on her now, except Kojo, who stood guard like a quiet tree beside her. But even he could not follow her to the place the dreams led, to the hut carved from stone and moss where an old woman waited, bones bent but eyes bright with knowing. This was Nana Aru, the priestess who once danced with Nia's mother under the full moon, who whispered with spirits as easily as breathing. Nia knelt before her and held the small gourd of ashes she now kept tied to her waist like a second heart. They whisper still? Nana Aru asked. Nia nodded. Every night. Sometimes I think they're warning me. Other times I think they want something I can't give. The old priestess touched the gourd gently. They want justice. That is all vengeance magic ever wants. But justice with fire always leaves something scorched, even the hands that summon it. Nia's eyes brimmed. I didn't summon it. Mama Jada burned the dowry. I didn't ask for this. No, child. But your mother did. The silence that followed that sentence felt like a drumbeat between Nia's ribs. She knew the world. She knew how it could be cruel, especially to a girl with kindness in her bones. So when she prepared your dowry, she didn't just sew beads and wrap silk. She whispered songs into the fabric. She dipped combs in sacred oil. She threaded her protection into each piece. If anyone tried to harm you, truly harm you, the dowry would rise. That was the oath she made. Nia closed her eyes, remembering her mother's hands, always warm, always smelling of shea and something older. So it's her, but twisted? Yes. The fire woke it, twisted it. Because vengeance needs flame. But you must understand this, Nia. You have a choice. She held her breath. The magic can be broken. The ashes can be laid to rest. You would need to offer them to the sacred river, speak the release and mean it. Truly mean it. But if you do, all of it will go. The voices, the visions, even your mother's whispers. You will be free but alone. Nia's heart pounded. And if I don't? Then you must bind it to you. Name it. Own it. Let the ashes become part of your blood. You will never be free. But you will never be weak again. You will carry your mother's wrath, her love, her sorrow. Forever. Kojo appeared in the doorway, watching, silent. Nia looked between the priestess and the gourd at her side. She had wanted so badly to be loved. To be safe. Now she had become a legend in whispers. The bride of ashes, they called her. A girl whose dowry rose in smoke and screamed at the night. She thought of Mama Jada. Of the smirk she wore as the flames danced. Of the villagers who backed away now in fear. Of the animals that would not come near. Of the way the ashes curled around her when she wept and hummed lullabies that once lived in her mother's throat. Could she let that go? Could she truly? Nia opened the gourd, letting the ashes drift between her fingers. They did not fall. They floated. Waiting. She whispered, I will not be weak. And in that moment the ashes stirred, then rushed into her skin, not burning but binding, like a second soul sliding into place. The priestess bowed her head. It is done. The wind outside picked up, swirling leaves and whispers through the trees. Nia rose, her eyes now deeper, darker. carrying the weight of 2 generations. She had made her choice. The village gathered at dawn. A heavy fog hung over the earth, but it wasn't weather, it was the ashes. They moved low, swirling like whispers beneath the villagers' feet, silent yet charged with something ancient and watchful. Mothers clutched children. Elders muttered prayers. No one dared speak above a whisper as Nia walked into the square. Her hair was wrapped in black cloth, her eyes steady and rimmed with sleepless red. The ashes followed behind her like a veil, coiling in slow arcs. Kojo stood at her side, his jaw tight. The village council had summoned them both, not to discuss peace but judgment. But Nia had come for something else. From the edge of the crowd, Mama Jada stepped forward. Her once proud frame was hunched, her eyes sunken and wild, lips cracked from muttering in her sleep. Her spirit had not known rest since the night of the fire. "You brought this curse upon us," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Nia. "You walk with death. With shadows." The council shifted uneasily. The ashes danced near Mama Jada's feet. Nia didn't flinch. Her voice was quiet yet clear. "I only walk with what was left behind. You know what you did." Mama Jada's eyes flickered. "I saved this family from shame." "No," Nia said, stepping closer. "You burned what you could not own. My mother's gifts. My dowry. My name." The crowd stirred. One of the council elders, his voice wary, asked, "Do you deny it, Mama Jada?" There was silence. Mama Jada opened her mouth to lie, and then the ashes rose. They twisted into ribbons of smoke, shaping her crime in the air. The fire, the laughter, the oil pouring from her hands. A vision everyone could see. A living memory. Gasps broke through the crowd. The sky darkened as the ashes began to circle, thickening into a storm. Mama Jada dropped to her knees, screaming. "I was jealous. She was just a child, but they gave her everything. I had nothing, nothing but a man who only saw his dead wife in her eyes." Her confession echoed like thunder. The ashes swirled higher, faster, a tempest ready to strike. But Nia raised her hand. "Stop," she whispered. "I choose mercy." The winds froze mid-spin. The ashes hovered in the air, then slowly settled to the ground like a quiet snowfall. Mama Jada wept. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the ashes retreated, coiling gently around Nia's ankles. They no longer raged, they waited. Not for blood. For choice. Nia looked at Mama Jada. "You will live," she said softly. "But you will live knowing the truth no fire can burn away." Mama Jada bowed her head. No fight remained. The council didn't speak. They didn't need to. The storm was over, but the ashes remained. As the villagers dispersed, Nia stood alone in the square, the ashes curling around her like a shawl of memory and sorrow. The wind whispered her name not as a warning but as a promise. She had chosen mercy, and the ashes had listened. But the final choice still lingered in her heart. To release them. Or to rise with them. The fire no longer roared, but it never truly died. Nia sat quietly on the edge of the compound, a woven shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The evening air was soft with distant laughter, the smell of roasted plantain drifting from a neighbor's hearth. The village had changed. She had changed. Inside her home, the ashes remained, collected in a wide clay pot that sat beneath the central beam. Most would have swept them away, scattered them to the winds, tried to forget. But Nia had learned, not everything that burns is meant to disappear. She heard the sound of small feet scampering. Her daughter, little Ebony, was crouched near the ember pot. The soft red glow lit her cheeks, and her tiny fingers moved through the air as though playing with invisible threads. She smiled. Nia's breath caught. The ashes did not rise, did not whisper, did not stir, but they pulsed. Gently. Watching. Ebony looked up, eyes wide with joy. "Mama, the pot sings." Nia walked over and knelt beside her child. "It remembers," she said. "That's its song." "Of what?" "Of fire. Of truth. Of the women who came before." Ebony giggled, innocent. But Nia felt the quiet weight of generations hum beneath them. She remembered her mother's voice, both the warmth and the warning. The dowry had been more than coins or cloth. It had been a covenant. A shield. A curse. It had been everything a mother could leave behind when she was no longer allowed to stay. The ashes had once wept, had screamed, had wrapped themselves around Nia in a fury she hadn't asked for. But she had chosen not to banish them. Not because she was angry, but because she knew their sorrow needed a home, and their memory deserved a name. Now they lived on as guardians. Not of vengeance, but of truth. The village still whispered about her. still left small offerings at the edge of her compound, not out of worship but out of respect and fear. She did not discourage them. She did not explain. Some stories worked better when half told. Her husband, Kojo, had learned to live with the silence in the walls, the warmth that never faded from their floors. He stood by her, not because he understood but because he chose to believe. And in that belief their home became a place of strange peace. "Mama," Ebony said, her eyes narrowing, "did the ashes ever scare you?" Nia smiled. "They did. But I learned something." "What?" "That some things aren't meant to be buried. Some spirits refuse to die." She took Ebony's hand and placed it lightly on the warm lip of the ember pot. "And in those ashes," she whispered, "I found myself." A soft wind passed through the compound, rustling the hanging gourds, brushing Nia's hair across her brow. The ashes glowed, then dimmed, content. Far away, drums echoed from another village. But here, in this small corner of a cursed story, a mother and her child sat beside the remnants of a fire that refused to die. And the girl smiled into the embers as though greeting old friends.